So as I mentioned yesterday when I was talking about that New York Times financial journalist Landon Thomas Jr.'s incredibly uncomfortably cozy relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and how he put blinders on, and how the New York Times and other members of the media, when they're cozy to somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, it means that they're not getting all the information out for us to know, which means what? Which means we don't make educated choices like electing somebody like convicted felon Donald Trump into office back in 2016. So while I was researching the stuff about Landon Thomas Jr., another person whose name I've been hearing in the news, but because it's on another continent, hasn't really kind of captured our attention, and it deals with a guy by the name of Peter Mandelson. Now, maybe some of you were kind of in the know about this, but I certainly wasn't, and so I have now gotten caught up to speed with the Epstein-Mandelson scandal. And when I tell you that I have to take my hat off and I want to give lauds and credit to England, they are putting their money where their mouths are. When you want to talk about accountability, people, let's talk about Britain. Because the prime minister in Britain right now, his name is Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer is weathering a storm of criticism right now. Why? Because he appointed as the ambassador from Britain to the United States this man, Peter Mandelson. Now, when you put in the name Mandelson in the DOJ's search engine, Mandelson name comes up 5,896 times. Now, it doesn't mean that there's 5,896 independent documents or items about Peter Mandelson in the DOJ Epstein library. And that, by the way, is the fault of the DOJ. And the search engine is notoriously unreliable. But you kind of have to stop yourself and ask, who in the hell is showing up 5,896 times with their last name? Now, Mandelson was, again, appointed to be the ambassador to the United States, but he has since stepped down from that role after, and this is before all of this dropped last Friday, but after kind of the news broke about Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and what was at that time thought to be kind of a smaller involvement, right, with Epstein. Well, now no. So Mandelson not only leaked, quote, sensitive government documents to Jeffrey Epstein, he also accepted money from Epstein, and they also engaged in a lot of back and forth via text and emails. Now, what I just cited to was the New York Times. And let me tell you something. Mandelson was a former member of parliament and a cabinet minister, fired as the ambassador after an earlier release of Epstein documents. Now, he has been forced to resign from the Labour Party and the House of Lords. And just a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, announced that Mandelson has been referred to the police for a possible criminal prosecution on suspicion of leaking confidential documents. That, my friends and viewers, that's accountability. At least it's the beginning of accountability, right? Right? And unlike in the United States, where you can remain the president of the United States, where you can still be employed at your mega law firm making a cajillion dollars, except you just step down as the chair like Brad Karp did at Paul Weiss, right? I mean, you could be Bill Gates and still, not face consequences. At least in England, they're saying, yeah, hell no. Now, given the criminal investigation that's been launched into Mandelson deals with the leaking of confidential documents, but I suspect along the way that we are going to learn more and more about Jeffrey Epstein. And look, people, I'll take the accountability where I can get it. Okay, so let's start with this. Oh, and by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention too, Prince Andrew. He's no longer Prince Andrew. He is now Mr. Mountbatten Windsor. Stripped of his royal titles by the King, Charles III, has been evicted from the royal residence on the grounds of Windsor Castle after about his, the revelations about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein came up. Now, Keir Starmer is saying, look, I knew that Mandelson had a relationship with Epstein before I appointed him, Mandelson, as the ambassador at the end of 2024. But Starmer is saying, and he seems pretty credible in his anger, that Mandelson gave a, quote, litany of deceit about the extent of his friendship with Epstein, the extent of which has only just kind of is the tip of the iceberg from what we saw in this release of documents on Friday. Starmer telling the House of Commons, quote, Mandelson betrayed our country. Now, let me give you a little bit of information about what I've uncovered as I have taken a dive into the DOJ's version of the Epstein files. So, while Jeffrey Epstein was still in jail, and I put that in quotes because remember, he had that 2008 sweetheart plea deal with Florida prosecutors after the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida, headed up by Alex Acosta, refused to prosecute him while still in jail. April 14th, 2009, Jeffrey Epstein emails Peter Mandelson. Let's just put a pin in that in a second. Access to electronic equipment, stuff like that, where you're not communicating with your lawyer. Okay. April 14th, 2009, while Jeffrey Epstein is still in jail, he emails Peter Mandelson, here we go again, to which Mandelson responds, meaning, ? At least I am not involved. And Jeffrey Epstein then responds, your romantic complexities. No idea what the hell that means. Really don't care. But I kind of want to give you just a detour on this particular email because it just highlights my theory that the Department of Justice, despite telling and making representations under oath to federal judges that they were employing all of these lawyers and staff to do the review because they wanted to protect the identities of the victims and the survivors and they didn't want to run afoul of the law, etc., even though we all know that's not true because we all know that they did the shittiest job redacting these poor victims and survivors' names and identifiers. I want you to look at this. This is Epstein File Transparency Act. That's debate stamp 1828446. And this is the email. I'm going to have it on your screen. And if you look at the original initiating email from Jeffrey Epstein to Peter Mandelson, April 14th, 2009, it was a Tuesday at 1:19 p.m. and it's military time, 13:19. It says, from Jeffrey Epstein, date to Peter Mandelson. And what does the DOJ do? The DOJ redacts Peter Mandelson's email. I want to stop there. The law, the EFTA, Epstein Files Transparency Act, does not allow for the redaction of things like Peter Mandelson's email. Okay, so that's a violation right here, violation number 1 of the law by the DOJ. And then, in the response from Peter Mandelson at 1:21 p.m., they again redact Mandelson's email address. Here's another violation of the EFTA. But then here's where it just gets so fucking stupid. The DOJ, by the way, thinks that we don't know that this was him back and forth with Peter Mandelson. And so you want to not redact Peter Mandelson's name, but you're going to redact his email address? And then you're going to redact his name. Anyway, I digress a little bit, but I just feel like it just goes to show how stupid this is, right? It's like, we'll redact the email, but leave the name, but then we won't show the name and we'll redact the name and the email address, but we already know who it is. Okay. Then, on June 16th, 2009, again, Epstein's still in jail. Mandelson is emailing with Jeffrey Epstein at his Gmail account. So apparently when Jeffrey Epstein is still serving his time, he has access to his Gmail address. Peter Mandelson says, shall I stay at yours Friday through Sunday this weekend? To which Epstein responds, would you prefer an apartment on redacted and redacted? Press issues, ? Your call, I'm thrilled to host and sad I'm not there. Not there because I'm in jail. Okay. He didn't say that, but I added that. Then Mandelson responds, I am in New York privately, should be okay, better facilities at yours. And facilities is in quotes. Don't want to know what Mandelson knows about Epstein's facilities. And yet I do. At what point is Congress going to interview Peter Mandelson to find out what the fuck he knew about Jeffrey Epstein's facilities? What do you mean by facilities? Why is it in quotes? Would it include sex dungeons? Would it include little girls running around being sexually abused? I mean, don't you think this man would know? Kind of like Landon Thomas Jr. would have some information too. How come nobody has been interviewing these people? These people that were so intimately in Epstein's orbit that they would know. But no, you want to be hot to trot and you want to throw contempt threats to the Clintons. Whatever. All right. Then Epstein forwards the request to have Peter Mandelson stay at Epstein's private residence in New York to someone whose name and email address are redacted. Maybe I'll give the DOJ the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that's an Epstein victim or survivor, but whatever. Saying, pleases, and implement. So even from jail, while serving his sentence, Jeffrey Epstein is giving orders to somebody to do stuff. Must be nice. Now, the day that Epstein is released from jail, on July 22nd, 2009, from serving his bullshit state sentence, Epstein emails Mandelson, subject, free and home. This is at 8:37 a.m. on Wednesday, July 22nd, 2009. Mandelson responds, how shall we celebrate? Epstein says, with grace and modesty, parentheses, those are the names of 2 strippers, end parentheses. Clearly pleading guilty to bullshit state charges didn't stop Jeffrey Epstein. Mandelson then asks, how is freedom feeling? To which Epstein responds, quote, she feels fresh, firm, and creamy. Mandelson responds, naughty boy. There's a secondary exchange that is not caught in this particular email exchange. Same date, same time frame. After Epstein responded to Mandelson saying, with grace and modesty, those are the names of 2 strippers, Mandelson responds as well, from now on, grace and modesty should be discovered in London, which is where Mandelson was living. Now, again, another example. Mandelson's email name and email address are redacted on one of these bait stamps, EFTA 772923, but then on EFTA 2440415, his name and email address not redacted. This is how stupid this is. I really do think the DOJ used AI or something to be able to do the redactions because they're just dumb, illogical, and they violate the Epstein Files Transparency Act, so they're also illegal. But on the day that Epstein is released from his jail sentence, 2009, he's already saying things, disgusting, horrific things like she feels fresh, firm, and creamy. And Mandelson is just fucking encouraging it by saying naughty boy. Disgusting. August 10th, 2009. And I talked about this yesterday when I talked about Landon Thomas Jr. and how Landon Thomas Jr. was a useful patsy, knowingly, intentionally in Epstein's world, wherein Epstein tells Peter Mandelson on August 10th, 2009, FYI, the reporter for the New York Times, Landon Thomas, now lives in London if you need to use him, to which Mandelson says, use him for what? And Epstein responds, now what were you hoping for? He's trustworthy and would write what you wanted. Boy, that sounds like objective journalism, not coming from Landon Thomas Jr. Now, these guys are writing back and forth, right? Maybe it sounds just personal. Maybe you think it's only personal. It's nothing more than just being personal. Oh, no. Lest you be not aware. Sunday, November 29th, 2009. Jeffrey Epstein tells Peter Mandelson, I never mentioned you to Landon. Keep it that way. Interesting, huh? So Epstein's running interference, so Landon Thomas Jr., the New York Times financial journalist, doesn't know about Peter Mandelson, right? But then here it goes. Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson start talking about Tony Blair. Tony Blair. Mandelson says, I'm talking to him tonight. Tony Blair, but he has said I should facilitate, not initiate. This is dealing with when Mandelson is basically saying, look, there's been this, change in what's happening in Parliament and everything, and Gordon Brown and all this other stuff. I mean, they're talking about very powerful people in England in the highest echelons of government, and they're talking about it. And Jeffrey Epstein is giving Peter Mandelson advice on how to deal with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. November 29th, 2009. Fast forward May 11th, 2010. At that point in time, Peter Mandelson is saying, look, I'm out of government as of May 2010, and I'm at a farewell event for Gordon Brown. Party headquarters for GB farewell, Gordon Brown farewell, May 11th, 2010. Epstein says to Peter Mandelson, big hug. And Mandelson says, you won't leave me, will you? And Epstein promises, never. That's how close these guys were. You don't think Peter Mandelson has some information about Jeffrey Epstein, what Jeffrey Epstein was doing with little girls? And who else was present when Jeffrey Epstein was doing shit with little girls? Saturday, July 16th, 2011, Peter Mandelson writes to Jeffrey Epstein, "What you doing? Home." Epstein responds at 3:09 p.m., "Spent the day with Gates in Seattle." That's Bill Gates, people. This is a quote, "having monstrous fun." What does monstrous fun mean with Bill Gates when you're Jeffrey Epstein? This is 2011. This is 3 years after Epstein has pleaded guilty to those state charges. 3 years after the world knows what Jeffrey Epstein does with little girls, children. Convicted child sex predator, child sex trafficker, child sex abuser. People also know about Ghislaine Maxwell's involvement in all this, right? And yet Bill Gates is having, quote, monstrous fun with Jeffrey Epstein in Seattle, no less. That's because we now have access to this information, and it's tangentially related to Peter Mandelson, and yet it also shows Mandelson would know something, wouldn't he? And then Mandelson writes back, "Have you found me deals yet?" So Mandelson is angling for Epstein to help him find deals. Epstein says, "You are a controversial figure." He says that to Peter Mandelson. Ironies abound. Peter Mandelson says, "Hardly think so." I mean, people, this is just a little bit of what I have discovered researching the Peter Mandelson stuff. And again, I want to underscore, it's not only this relationship with Epstein, there's also some very suggestive and sexual things that kind of go back and forth, but there's also this known release of government information and documents, and that is what has triggered the investigation that is being done by a parliamentary committee called the Intelligence and Security Committee, the ISC. They are seeking, quote, maximum transparency about the vetting process that Mandelson had to go through before he became the ambassador in late 2024. The ISC has, quote, statutory responsibility for oversight of the United Kingdom's intelligence services. The ISC will assess whether documents should not be released because they compromise national security rather than jeopardizing international relations. And this is me citing to The Guardian. The leader of the ISC says this: "We do need to ensure that we get maximum transparency." And so, of course, what happens? Once this referral is made for this criminal investigation into Mandelson's release and leaking of confidential government documents, Downing Street, kind of like our White House equivalent, right? Downing Street tries to mitigate this release of documents by saying, no, we got to add exemptions to the release. What does that sound like? Sounds like fucking Trump in the White House, right? And the DOJ. But then, no. The MPs say, this is a cover-up. We're not going to allow for this. And in the end, there was an amendment that was done to make sure that the ISC, the Intelligence and Security Committee, makes the decision rather than the cabinet secretary. I mean, how refreshing is it, people, to see that you can actually interject independence to make sure that there's the proper discretion that is done on the release of documents? Hoping to the release of documents a couple of days ago, but the ISC was prevented from doing so because Metropolitan Police are saying, we're doing a criminal investigation into Mandelson's sharing of confidential government documents at Epstein, so we don't want you to release stuff yet. Do you know Peter Mandelson also offered to help Jeffrey Epstein get a Russian visa? What do you need to go to Russia for? Oh, because Epstein wanted to go procure and meet young women in Moscow. Again, Mandelson knows, and yet Congress is having no conversations with Mandelson, right? And here's the other kind of wrinkle I want to share with you guys. There are calls for Keir Starmer to step down as the PM. Why? Because, ready? Paula Barker, the MP for Liverpool Wavertree, says, "I think the Prime Minister has shown that his judgment is questionable. I think he has questions to answer. I think he has a very long way to go to build trust and confidence with the public and trust and confidence within our party." You think? And yet, we still are stuck with this asshole in the White House who is more, I'm telling you, has involved. Keir Starmer doesn't have involvement with Epstein. Donald Trump does. And the freaking, Labor Party and even the MPs are like, whoa, I don't really know. I don't really know if we need to let Starmer be here because his judgment was so shitty to allow Mandelson to be the ambassador to the United States. And yet we're stuck with Trump. And listen, just in case y'all were saying, oh, well, Katie, does Mandelson really have that kind of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? In 2003, in Epstein's birthday book, Mandelson sent a message to Jeffrey in which he described Jeffrey as, quote, his best pal. Remember, that's the birthday book that we only got because House Oversight subpoenaed it from the Epstein estate. That birthday book that Donald Trump sent the birthday congratulatory note for in the shape of the woman. Remember that one? That birthday book that also shows the check and the purchase of women, whether it's in jest or not, which it's just not. I mean, look, people, I wanted to share this with you because the more that I dive into this DOJ release of the Epstein files, and there's just so much there, right? I just don't think it's humanly possible for one person to be able to do it, which is why I'm so grateful that we're all kind of collectively going through it. But when I see an example of accountability, when I see an example of a country that says, we are not going to stand for this, we are going to make sure people step down, resign, or forced to resign, we're going to strip them of their titles, and hey, by the way, we're also going to do criminal investigation, like that's fucking accountability, people. This little dog and pony bullshit, which is even incomplete, that we have going on courtesy of Pamela Joe, Todd Blanche, and the White House. Look, that is complicity at its worst, because that's not transparency. And this drip and drab and drops of stuff, and now Blanche says we got it all. We didn't get it all, because I'm going to tell you right now, there is way more out there, and it implicates Donald Trump, and that's the reason why we're not seeing it. I'm telling you right now. It is February 6, 2026, people. We continue to fight. We continue to be mad, to be outraged, and to demand accountability, because that's who we are as Americans. Keep on fighting, folks. You know I am. I'll be back with some more info that I'm getting out of these Epstein files. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.